Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 2 of Meet the PhD. And today we have Sanjay with us. He's joining us from Austria in Europe, and he's currently in the first year of his PhD. Hi, Sanjay. Thanks for joining. And I just want to tell everybody how I know Sanjay is through the bachelor studies because we did our bachelor's in biotechnology together in SRM University from India. And thank you, Sanjay, for joining us, for sharing your insights and experiences on your PhD. So, as I mentioned before, he's currently in the first year of his PhD. And the question with which I want to start this interview is that, Sanjay, maybe you would want to tell the audience that in which particular department and research program you're doing your PhD in, and what are the specific research questions that you're trying to answer here.
So, hello everybody. My name is Sanjay, and as Shaili mentioned, I'm in the first year of my PhD. So these are still early days for me.
Yeah.
So I'm currently doing my PhD in the Life Sciences Division at the Department of Neuroscience and Developmental Biology here at the University of Vienna.
Yes.
And because it's still early days, my questions are still sort of taking shape. But as of now, I'm basically working with this model organism called Nematostella vectensis, which happens to be a cnidarian, and it's more commonly known as the sea anemone. It has tentacles and a nice foot, and it has amazing regenerative capacities. And one of the things that it is also amazing at is being able to live really long without much deterioration and without much aging generally. So with that as a fulcrum, I will investigate if my organism, Nematostella vectensis, is senescent or not, if it ages or not, and what mechanisms underlie its apparent immortality. So that's the research question that I will broadly try to tackle during my PhD.
Okay, all right. So that's an interesting thing that you brought here is that there are different types of experimental models in the field of life sciences, and people should not restrict themselves just to the basic or only the known experimental models. So this is very interesting insight for the audience or for the future students who want to join life sciences. Yeah,
exactly. And it's also like you mentioned, it's now a healthy trend in biology to explore so-called non-model organisms, because in aging, usually there are a couple of model organisms that people usually use, which is of course human aging, and then there's C. elegans, Drosophila, and Xenopus. So these are your usual model organisms. So we have also these non-model organisms that are coming up right now, which is organisms like Hydra and Nematostella vectensis, which the one I'm working on. And so I think that it's non-model organisms have a lot to add in terms of the perspectives and also the amount of basic science information that you can give a particular context. And so non-model organisms are really important.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, even like sometimes when we see into the listing of the Nobel Prizes, so we've known that the very basic research in the field of memory by Dr. Eric Kendall has been done in a very uncommon sort of a experimental model. So, like, it's always interesting to explore different options.
Yeah.
Different experimental models, and they are very tiny, but then they have a lot of different advantages, and they can definitely share make us learn so much about science. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back. Let's go back to the questions again. I would like to ask you here is that why did you choose this field, and what was the moment like when you decided to pursue your PhD in this field?
Why did I choose this field? So basically, when we look around us, we see a multitude of organisms, a lot of diversity, and diversity exists in many forms. And one of those forms is actually lifespan. So everything starting from your rat to your elephant of all sizes and shapes, you have all organisms with so many different lifespan set points. And so how an organism's lifespan is determined is actually a very enigmatic question to ask. And so we have a lot of variation in lifespan across species, and this is determined by multiple factors. For example, your genetic factors, your environmental factors, and of course stochastic factors, which we still sort of dissecting. And so if you look at the lifespan chart, you have a couple of standout organisms on your lifespan chart, and some of these are like the famed Hydra, which is known to be non-senescent and non-aging. And of course, Nematostella, which is the one I'm working on, these organisms are basically outliers on the lifespan chart. And you know that because when you look at the parents and the offspring, they look pretty much the same. And so you really can't make distinction between the two generations. And so I think that this is quite distinct, and sort of tells you how interesting it would be to study these kind of organisms in the context of aging, basically how they escape senescence and aging, basically.
Yeah, it's very
So
interesting there. Yeah.
so this is, I mean, this is kind of why I chose the field. I felt that Nematostella can add a lot of value to the aging context. And also, what was the moment like when I pursued it? And so the moment sort of occurred in during my master's thesis, when I was actually studying a completely different topic, which was natural variation in flowering time regulatory networks in Arabidopsis thaliana. So it was completely in plants.
Yes.
So it was a completely different topic. And when I was doing my master's thesis there, we often had these journal clubs which exposed us to, a lot of related papers, different but related somehow, papers that we would find interesting for that particular topic. And one of those was actually studying mutational load in killifish and how that affected their lifespan. And so I was presenting one of the figures in that particular journal club, and so I had to really thoroughly read that paper. And as I was doing that, I actually started gaining a lot of interest in the evolutionary mechanisms of aging and how they arose, and how they were modulated in different organisms. And killifish itself actually is a really amazing emerging model organism for aging. It has this Dower state, which basically allows it to extend its lifespan, actually. So it's a really fun organism to work with in aging. And so as I read more and more about it, I like the context of aging and the context of senescence. But so I made a connection back to Nematostella, which is the organism I'm currently working with, because one of the lab rotations that I was doing during my master's program was actually working with Nematostella vectensis. And so I made the connection. I basically took aging and senescence from my journal club paper and connected it to Nematostella vectensis, which seems to escape aging and senescence. And I thought this would be a really interesting connection to explore during my PhD. And so that's kind of what sparked my interest in doing a PhD in this particular topic.
That's interesting. So you brought very two important things in the way that I think here is that one is the importance of journal clubs, because often we are very anxious when we have to present something, but if we take it from a different perspective, that we can learn a lot from them. And in your case, that this formed the basis of your PhD was something that is that we should keep in mind, that these journal clubs could make us learn a lot, and we should not fear them. Rather, also be open to when other people are presenting in journal clubs, so that we can get a lot from those journal clubs. It's all about learning at the end of the day. So that, and the other interesting thing I found in your case is that you were able to make a connection between a different model altogether and a different concept like aging from a different approach. So basically, you were connecting two different things, and that's something that we should also develop as budding scientists, that the ability to connect different things. So when you're even going to conferences, it gives you an ability to connect with people, network, and also expand your field, because sometimes they might be working on totally different topic. But if you are interested and keeping your research question in your mind, then you can always think how their topic relates to yours. And this is a very important activity that we should try to do, because in that way we learn a lot as to how our research topic is interacting with different aspects of science. And sometimes we discover some certain things that we have never even thought of. So it's a very good activity that we should try to do. In fact, I also often do it. Unknowingly I was doing it, and I intended to discuss this with my supervisor, and she was like, in fact, this is a good thing, you should keep on doing it, don't stop it. I mean, we should keep our focus, definitely, that I know that what my research question is about, but always trying to connect dots and creating a bigger picture in science is so relevant.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to connecting dots, the most important thing is you can connect more dots only if you have more dots to connect, and that means you should be able to collect those dots from multiple avenues.
Yes.
And that means basically having an open mind to everybody else's work and garnering some insight from there. And in my case, yeah, I was just fortunate enough to make this connection. And of course, the most important bottom line, which is don't underestimate your journal club.
Yes, very important. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, we will have to attend them. So it's our attitude towards them that determines, because there's no escape. There's
Exactly.
literally no escape. So
Yeah.
all the prospective students out there, be ready to prepare and present in journal clubs.
Yeah.
So, all right. Yeah. And then I have another question for you here. So I'm also kind of interested in knowing, so what is your career trajectory until now?
So for me, luckily, the focus of if I can still call it the career so far has
Yeah.
been basically the biology throughout, which
Mm-hmm.
is something I consider to be lucky to be able to do because I mean not many people end up doing one particular topic as the theme throughout their entire career.
Yes.
And I've been fortunate enough basically to stick to the same theme throughout all the stages of my career. So starting from, of course, the undergraduation, which is something that Shaili mentioned early on, something that we both did at SRM University. And so until the end of our graduation is something that we both share. And then right after our undergraduation, I basically went on to do a brief stint in a molecular diagnostic startup company in Chennai. I thought it would be interesting because personalized medicine is sort of still yet to make a huge mark in India. I and that basically requires a lot of jumps in technology, and I felt that would be an interesting avenue to explore.
Mm-hmm.
So to get some hands-on experience, I joined the startup company there in Chennai, and I think I basically worked there for a little bit more than half a year.
Yeah.
And that was when actually, as a result of my work there, I had to go to a conference, and it was during the conference where they had these academic discussions of all the panels that we were basically selling as products, and that academic discussion sort of spurred me on, and I felt that it was really time for me to come back to academia.
Mm.
So it was right after that conference, and it was a couple of weeks right after that I started to apply for master's programs. More specifically, I applied to two master's programs, one of which was the evolutionary systems biology master's program that I ended up doing here in Vienna. And yeah, so from there onwards, it's just been 2 years of lot of academic fun. Basically, a lot of exposure to multiple model and non-model organisms that we were talking about earlier,
Mhm.
and also really how to handle big data sets. And so basically expanding my skill set both on the dry lab and wet lab level. And so this particular master's program has been quite enriching. And it was during the course of this master's that I ended up also picking my master's thesis topic and doing it my master's thesis at the Gregor Mendel Institute here at the Vienna Biocenter, which is a hidden gem in Vienna.
Yeah.
It's basically it's a huge sort of it's like a IT park, you could say, or like a bio park. Basically contains multiple academic institutions that are coupled together with startup companies, and
Mhm.
so you're right next to companies, and so basically people are talking to each other, and there's a lot of benefits that come out of that and working in such an environment. So
Yeah.
I ended up doing my master's thesis there at the Nordberg group, which is run by Professor Dr. Magnus Nordberg.
Mhm.
And the theme of the master's thesis was, broadly speaking, population genetics in Arabidopsis thaliana.
Okay.
And so that was a really cool, interesting topic that I had the opportunity to work on during my master's thesis. And yeah, from there, basically, it was the journal club, the killifish paper, and making a connection back to Nematostula victensis. And I'm
Mhm.
here doing my PhD on it. So it's been a ride.
Nice. So I have three takeaways from your answer here, and that is very important because first of all, the fact that you mentioned here that you explored your options after your bachelor studies, and this is to all the audience here is because we are often not sure of what we want to do. Some of us are clear in our head what we want to do after our bachelor studies, but if you're not sure if you want to stay in industry or academia, like you want to try your hands on, then it's often good that you explore your options because it is never too late and it's never a waste of time. And you always learn a lot from this. So make sure that if you are standing on this in a crossroad, then you always um, like spend some amount of time experimenting on yourself as to what you like and what you don't like. And this is very important because once you choose something, yes, you can always go back, but it's always good that in the initial years of your career that you explore more options. Yeah. Do you want to add something? Yeah.
Yes, I think at this point it's also important to take advantage. I think of the fact that this generation is, on an average, fairly well off in to the extent where people can afford to take a couple of months off to experiment, and I think that that should be taken advantage of. Otherwise, it's you should basically be able to take some free time off. You don't really have to do stuff actually. Just take free time off just to introspect about what you want to do, where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
That's something
That's a
completely
very good
separate.
point. Yeah.
And of course, academically speaking, whether you want to do academia or you want to do industry, all these choices can also be made during times off.
Yes.
So I think that we can also afford to do this, and so I think that also plays in as an important factor for this particular generation,
Yeah.
especially. And of course, it doesn't mean that you can do PhD only in academia.
Yeah.
PhD is an open option, obviously, in industry as well.
Yes, please. Yeah.
And most of the products are I mean, all of the products are based on some R&D that happens on something in industry, basically. So
Yes.
if you feel that you want to answer research questions in industry, you can do so. You can do your PhDs there as well. And so I think that you shouldn't discount that as well.
Yeah, and the other thing that comes to my mind is that we always have like 3 years or 4 years during our bachelor studies. So we shouldn't even like wait for those 3 or 4 years to get over and then explore our options. While we are studying, we always have like, this free time that we can go to industry, talk to people who are already working in industry, like extend your connections from then on. And the earlier you start, the better it is. And this is, I think, if I would go back to my bachelor studies and if somebody is to give me this advice, I will follow it more. Although I guess most of us did this, I mean, followed this advice. Somewhere or the other, we did like step our foot in science very early on, and that's why it was easy for us to get into good universities. But if somebody was aiming to get into really nice universities, it's always good to connect because you never know with what connection you'll get into the university. Yeah.
And I mean, just to add to that, I think there's
Yeah.
also this common misconception that you need to have a really coherent resume or CV or something to get into a position, which is people try really hard to construct projects based on one particular theme so that they can get into a lab or do a particular kind of work. But I guess it's important to realize that it's obviously early days, and if you make up your mind about what you want to do so early on, then it becomes really hard. And so I think it's important to explore at every sort of stage, just like Shaili said, even during our undergrad, to take your summer times and basically use that for internships and basically try your hand at different things and not fixate so much on what topic you want to do so early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, that's true. We should explore our options. Yeah. And then the second takeaway from here is that you were mentioning about the academia and industry. They were like, working together in the place of your work. And that is so interesting because we need this combination of both to, enrich science. And this is so important. We should not consider them as like separate things for the success of science. Rather, there has to be an integration between these two. Yeah.
And I think I mean, this is a weird comparison to make, but I mean, we've always seen these TV shows where people had these top secret access to particular labs that are working on
Yeah.
confidential products and things like that. And it always feels cool because when you're working in academia and industry, and when you have sort of special access to this particular industry right
True.
there, you get to work with their R&D products, which are fresh off the shelf. They haven't started scaling it up yet. And actually, one of the things that I got the opportunity to work with are, of course, polymerases, which is the company that was right next door, was working on these really high efficiency polymerases. And so I had the opportunity to use actually their stuff for my work actually. And so this is I mean, I would consider this a perk actually. And it's really cool.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a story to tell your friends as well.
Nice. Yeah, these are like small perks
Yeah.
in while working with industry. Yeah, side by side. And the third takeaway is about the awareness of self. Because if you yourself didn't know that you were not fit for the industry and you wanted to step into academia back, I don't think anybody would have told you that, Sanjay, go join academia. So basically, to all the audience, this is like a very strong message that I want to give here, is that we all have to decide for ourselves what we want to get into. People will suggest you that these are the options, and even through these interviews, we are just going to share with you what our experiences are, and you have to decide for yourself what you're fit for, and for that you need to experiment. So you have to be your own experiment to decide for yourself what fits for you and what does not. So have the courage to experiment, and also have the courage to choose for yourself what you want to do in the future. Yeah.
I think that's perfect. I think whatever Shaili